John had lived his entire life on the ranch, a vast stretch of land in rural Texas where the sky seemed endless and the wind carried the scent of dry grass and cattle. From a young age, he had learned the value of hard work. His days were long, beginning before sunrise and often stretching past sunset. There was always something to do: feeding the animals, repairing fences, fixing equipment, checking the irrigation, or preparing the ranch for the harsh seasons. It was a life of routine, but John had grown accustomed to it. Despite the beauty of the land, there was a loneliness that clung to him like morning mist. His parents had passed away when he was in his early 20s, leaving him the ranch and the weight of responsibility that came with it. Over the years, he had watched friends marry, move on, and start families, while he remained alone, absorbed in the life of the ranch. Relationships had come and gone, brief sparks that faded quickly. He had loved, or at least tried to. But something always seemed to hold him back, or perhaps it was life itself. John's small house sat at the center of the ranch, modest but well kept. Its wooden floors creaked underfoot, and the walls were lined with photographs of the ranch through the seasons. There were pictures of him as a boy, helping his father with chores, and of the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. The house was full of memories, but it felt emptier with each passing year. At night, he would sit by the fireplace, listening to the crackle of the wood, and wonder if this quiet, steady life was all he was destined to have. His family had tried to help him. His younger sister, Sarah, had often teased him gently about finding someone, about the loneliness that weighed on him more than he admitted. "You don't have to do everything alone, John," she would say with a knowing smile. "There's more to life than fences and cattle." But John would shrug it off, sometimes with a half smile, sometimes with a quiet sigh. He had tried dating, even briefly seeing a few women from town, but nothing ever lasted. His work was demanding, his schedule unpredictable, and the women he met seemed to want more time and attention than he could give. Over time, he convinced himself that perhaps love, in the romantic sense, was not meant for him. It was during one of these quiet evenings that his sister brought up the idea of a mail-order bride. She didn't push, but she suggested it gently, almost as if planting a seed. At first, John laughed it off. The thought seemed foreign, even strange. He had grown up in a world where people met through friends, at church, or at local gatherings, not through letters and photographs sent from faraway countries. Yet, the more he considered it, the more practical it seemed. He wanted companionship, someone to share the quiet nights with, someone who could walk beside him through the routines of ranch life. Perhaps this was the answer he had been resisting for so long. The process was not easy. John spent weeks writing letters, reading profiles, and exchanging messages. There were moments of skepticism and doubt. Could a woman from another country truly understand the life he lived? Would she find the ranch too isolated, the work too hard, the days too long? And yet, there was a part of him that hoped. Maybe this was a chance not just for companionship, but for a connection that could change the course of his lonely existence. Finally, after much deliberation, he received a response. Her name was Lee May. She was young, quiet, and polite, with a soft smile in the photographs that seemed to reach her eyes. She wrote about her family, her life in China, and her hopes for the future. Her words were simple, honest, and heartfelt. She admitted that she did not know much about ranch life, but she expressed a genuine curiosity and a willingness to learn. John felt a flicker of hope, a sense that perhaps this could be the beginning of something meaningful. As the day of her arrival approached, John felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He wondered what she would be like in person. Would they have things in common? Would they be able to communicate, understand each other, and find common ground? He also worried about the adjustment she would have to make, leaving her home, family, and everything familiar behind to start a life in a place so different from what she knew. But beneath all the worry, there was a quiet anticipation, a sense that life might be about to shift in a way he had never expected. When Lee May finally arrived, she stepped off the bus with her small suitcase, looking around at the wide open space of the ranch with cautious curiosity. She seemed smaller than he had imagined, delicate against the backdrop of the vast land. Her eyes were bright, her expression a mix of wonder and apprehension. John felt a strange sense of relief. She was real, and she was here. They exchanged polite greetings, and he showed her to the house. There was an awkwardness between them at first, the kind that comes with meeting someone completely new. Someone who will share your life in ways both small and profound. The first days were quiet, filled with tentative conversation and careful observation. Li Mei asked questions about the ranch, the animals, and the work that needed to be done. John answered patiently, sometimes elaborating on tasks she had never seen before. They walked the fields together, checked on the cattle, and repaired fences side by side. There were moments of laughter when a cow ran unexpectedly, or when Li Mei struggled with a stubborn tool, but also moments of silence. Comfortable in their own way, as they each absorbed the new reality of their lives together. John found himself noticing things about Li Mei that went beyond her appearance or polite manners. She was attentive, careful, and respectful of the work that had become second nature to him. She asked questions not to challenge, but to understand. She learned quickly, adapting to the rhythms of the ranch with a grace that impressed him. Slowly, he began to feel a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. Not the rush of romantic love, but the quiet assurance that someone was here, sharing his life, willing to walk beside him through the daily challenges. At night, they would sit by the fireplace, talking softly about their days. Li Mei shared stories of her childhood in China, of festivals, family traditions, and the small joys of her former life. John listened, fascinated by the differences and the similarities. He shared stories of his own upbringing, of the lessons his father had taught him, and the dreams he had once held. The house, once so quiet and filled only with the sound of the wind, now had a new rhythm, the sound of two people beginning to understand each other, finding common ground despite the distance of their origins. Days turned into weeks, and John began to notice a shift within himself. The loneliness that had been a constant companion seemed to recede. Replaced by a cautious optimism, he found himself looking forward to Li Mei's questions, her laughter, her presence. There was a sense of partnership developing, a feeling that the life he had resigned himself to might not be as solitary as he had feared. For the first time in many years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that included someone else, not just a companion, but someone who could share in the quiet victories and small joys of ranch life. Yet, he remained cautious. He knew that forming a true bond would take time, patience, and understanding. Both of them were stepping into unfamiliar territory, balancing hope with realism. John had learned over the years that life could be unpredictable, that attachments could be fragile, but he also knew that to open his heart fully, he had to take a step of faith not just in Li Mei, but in the possibility that life could still surprise him. As the sun set over the ranch, casting golden light over the fields and the cattle, John watched Li Mei carefully tending to the chores she had learned. He felt a quiet gratitude, a recognition that this was more than just a practical arrangement. It was a beginning, a chance to rebuild his life in a way he hadn't imagined. And for the first time in a long while, he felt that life could be full of promise, even in the most unexpected ways. The first days on the ranch were a whirlwind of new experiences for Li Mei. Everything was so different from the small town in China where she had grown up. The wide open fields stretched endlessly under the blue sky, dotted with grazing cattle, barns, and winding dirt paths. The air smelled of grass, earth, and the faint scent of horses and hay. It was a world that seemed both beautiful and intimidating, and Li Mei often found herself pausing to take it all in, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She quickly realized that life on a ranch was not easy. The work was physical and demanding. She had to learn how to feed the cattle, mend fences, carry buckets of water, and help with chores that John had been doing alone for years. At first, her hands were sore, her back tired, and she sometimes stumbled over the unfamiliar equipment. But she was determined. She wanted to prove that she could adapt, that she could be useful and dependable. Each day, she pushed herself a little harder, learning from John and from her own mistakes. John watched her carefully. He was impressed by her persistence and her willingness to learn. At first, he had worried that she might find the work too hard or the life too lonely, but Li Mei's quiet determination slowly changed his perception. He began to see her not as a stranger, but as someone who was capable, thoughtful, and patient. There were small moments that surprised him. The way she remembered details about the animals, how she asked questions to understand better rather than to argue, and how she smiled even when things didn't go perfectly. The language barrier added its own challenges. Li Mei's English was good, but not perfect, and John's patience was sometimes tested. Misunderstandings happened, often in humorous ways. Once, she had tried to describe how a cow had run unexpectedly, and John had struggled to understand. They ended up laughing at the confusion, and the shared laughter helped break the tension between them. Over time, the communication became smoother. Words were no longer obstacles but bridges. Slowly, they learned to read each other's expressions, gestures, and tone, understanding things without needing to speak every detail. Despite the hard work, Li Mei found beauty in the routine. She loved the way the sunrise painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, casting long shadows over the fields. She enjoyed walking through the pastures, feeling the soft grass under her feet, and watching the animals graze peacefully. She discovered a rhythm in ranch life, a sense of order and purpose that was comforting in its predictability. Every small task completed: mending a fence, feeding the cattle, collecting eggs, brought a sense of satisfaction that she had never experienced in her previous life. John began to notice changes in himself as well. He had always been used to solitude, but having Li Mei around made the house feel warmer. He found himself looking forward to her questions, her observations, and even her quiet presence in the room. She had a way of noticing small details, like how he liked his coffee in the morning, or how he preferred the tools arranged in a certain order. These small acts of attention, seemingly insignificant, touched him more than he expected. Slowly, he began to open up, sharing bits of his past, his childhood memories, and stories about life on the ranch. Evenings became their favorite time of day. After the work was done, they would sit together in the modest living room of the house. Li Mei would sometimes cook simple meals she had learned from her mother, while John helped set the table. The aroma of food filled the house, blending with the smell of wood from the fireplace. They would talk about their days, laugh at small mistakes, and slowly, the conversations became deeper. Li Mei shared stories of festivals and traditions from her hometown, her eyes lighting up as she described them. John shared tales of his childhood on the ranch, of adventures and misadventures, of lessons learned the hard way. At first, there was a careful distance between them. They were still strangers in many ways, learning about each other and adjusting to life together. But slowly, that distance began to shrink. Li Mei's curiosity about ranch life, her willingness to try new things, and her gentle sense of humor made John feel a closeness he had not felt in years. He started to realize that he no longer saw her as someone who had simply agreed to a practical arrangement. She was becoming a presence he valued, someone whose opinions and feelings mattered to him. Li Mei, too, began to notice the depth of John's character. She had expected a gruff, distant man, set in his ways and unwilling to change, but she found someone patient, thoughtful, and surprisingly gentle. He had a quiet strength, the kind that came not from force or loud words, but from years of experience and responsibility. He was protective, but not overbearing, serious, but capable of laughter, and he treated her with respect and consideration. She began to feel safe, understood, and even cared for, a feeling that was new and unfamiliar, yet comforting. The pair also faced challenges together. Life on the ranch was unpredictable. Weather could change suddenly, causing work to be rushed or delayed. Animals sometimes fell sick or got injured, requiring immediate attention. Li Mei learned quickly how to remain calm in stressful situations, assisting John and following instructions carefully. There were nights when they worked late into the evening, fixing fences under lantern light or checking on a sick cow. These moments, though exhausting, brought them closer. They shared responsibility, trust, and teamwork, learning that they could rely on each other when needed. There were also moments of quiet reflection. Li Mei would sometimes sit alone by the edge of the field, looking at the stars in the clear night sky, thinking about how much her life had changed. She had left her family and her familiar home behind, stepping into a world that was completely new. And yet, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't expected. John, too, found himself pausing more often, watching her work or listening to her tell a story, and feeling a warmth he had thought was impossible. The loneliness he had carried for years was slowly giving way to companionship, a steady presence that made life richer. As the weeks passed, their bond strengthened in subtle but meaningful ways. John began to notice Li Mei's thoughtfulness, how she remembered little details about the ranch, how she anticipated the needs of the animals, and how she adapted quickly to unexpected challenges. Li Mei noticed John's patience and fairness, his willingness to teach rather than scold, and his quiet sense of humor that emerged in small moments. Together, they found a rhythm, a balance between work, learning, and growing closer. One afternoon, a heavy rainstorm swept across the ranch. The wind whipped through the fields, and the cattle grew restless. Li Mei and John worked side by side, securing the barn doors, covering equipment, and making sure the animals were safe. By the time the storm passed, they were soaked and tired, but there was a sense of accomplishment and teamwork that felt deeply satisfying. They laughed at how drenched they were, shared a warm cup of tea, and realized that facing challenges together was making their connection stronger. Little by little, the walls between them began to fade. Simple gestures, a helping hand, a shared joke, a moment of understanding, built trust and comfort. John found himself thinking about Li Mei during the day, wondering how she was handling tasks or what she might be noticing about the ranch. Li Mei, in turn, thought about John's kindness, his patience, and the quiet way he made her feel included and appreciated. Their interactions became more natural, less formal, and more genuine. By the end of the second month, what had begun as a cautious and practical arrangement had started to transform into something more profound. There was a sense of partnership, mutual respect, and quiet affection developing between them. John realized he was no longer just thinking of her as a guest or a helper. Li Mei was becoming an essential part of his daily life, someone whose presence made the ranch and his life feel fuller, warmer, and richer. Li Mei, too, felt a growing attachment to John. She admired his strength, appreciated his patience, and enjoyed his quiet sense of humor. She had come to the ranch expecting a practical arrangement, maybe a distant companionship. But she had found herself feeling safe, respected, and cared for in ways she had never imagined. She began to feel that this life, though challenging, was becoming home not just because of the ranch, but because of the man who shared it with her. Evenings became the most cherished part of their days. They would sit together by the fireplace, sharing stories, planning tasks for the next day, and sometimes simply enjoying the quiet presence of each other. Words were not always necessary. A glance, a smile, or a simple gesture spoke volumes. Both of them felt that the bond they were forming was real, built not on grand gestures but on shared experiences, trust, and the gradual understanding of each other's hearts. Li Mei and John were learning that love did not always arrive in dramatic moments. Sometimes it grew quietly, steadily, in the small acts of care, the shared labor, and the laughter over simple mistakes. They were discovering that companionship could be fulfilling in ways that were both surprising and comforting. And as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, it became clear to both of them that what had started as a cautious, practical decision was beginning to blossom into something meaningful, a connection that neither had anticipated but both had come to value deeply. By the time spring settled over the ranch, John and Li Mei had established a rhythm in their lives that was both comforting and surprising. The mornings were filled with work feeding the cattle, checking fences, collecting eggs, and repairing tools. But there was an unspoken companionship now, a silent understanding that they were in this life together. Tasks that had once felt exhausting were now shared, and even the most mundane chores seemed lighter because they were done side by side. Li Mei's confidence had grown. She no longer hesitated when handling the animals or learning the nuances of ranch life. She could guide the cows to the pens, help with vaccinations, and even repair small breaks in fences without needing John's direction. John noticed this transformation with a mix of pride and admiration. He had worried at first that she might find ranch life too harsh or isolating, but she had embraced it with determination, curiosity, and grace. Each day, she surprised him with her resilience, her intelligence, and her willingness to learn from mistakes rather than be discouraged by them. Their conversations also began to deepen. In the early days, they had spoken mostly about tasks and practical matters, but now, they shared stories about their childhoods, their dreams, and their fears. Li Mei spoke of her family in China, her parents, her siblings, and the traditions she had grown up with. She described festivals, celebrations, and even the simple joys of daily life that she had missed since leaving home. John listened attentively, asking questions and showing genuine interest. In return, he shared memories of his own childhood on the ranch, the long days spent learning from his father, the lessons of patience and responsibility, and the quiet joys of life close to the land. One afternoon, they took a break from work and walked together along the edge of the pasture. The sun was warm, the sky bright blue, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers mixed with fresh earth. They talked about things they had never shared before. Li Mei admitted that she had been nervous about moving so far from home, unsure if she could adapt to such a different life. John, in turn, confessed that he had never believed he would find someone who could truly understand him, let alone share the daily burdens and joys of ranch life. They laughed together at the irony of their situation, two strangers from very different worlds, brought together by chance, now finding comfort in each other's presence. It was during moments like these that the bond between them deepened. John began to notice small details about Li Mei that he had overlooked before. The way her eyes lit up when she learned something new, the care she showed toward the animals, and the gentle patience she extended to both people and tasks. Li Mei, likewise, saw sides of John that she had not expected: his quiet humor, his thoughtfulness in small gestures, and the steady calm he exuded even in stressful situations. They were learning to appreciate each other not only for their actions but for the person behind them. The bond also grew through challenges. Life on the ranch was rarely predictable. One day, a sudden storm rolled in. Dark clouds gathering over the fields, lightning splitting the sky, and heavy rain beginning to fall. The cattle became restless, and John and Li Mei worked quickly to bring them to safety. They ran through mud and puddles, holding ropes and guiding the animals, their clothes soaked and their hands raw. The storm was exhausting, but it was also a test of trust and cooperation. They learned to rely on each other instinctively, without hesitation. And in those shared moments, their connection strengthened in ways neither could have anticipated. Even after the storm passed, the experience lingered in their minds. Sitting by the fireplace that evening, sipping warm tea, they talked about how they had handled the chaos. John smiled and complimented Li Mei on her courage and composure, and she laughed, saying she had only managed because he had guided her. In that moment, there was a sense of equality and mutual respect. They were not teacher and student, nor employer and helper. They were partners, facing life together with trust and care. As the days grew longer and warmer, Li Mei began to take more initiative around the ranch. She experimented with small improvements, organizing tools more efficiently, planting flowers near the house, and even suggesting ways to make chores easier. John was impressed by her creativity and her willingness to contribute ideas. He had expected a practical companion, but he was discovering someone thoughtful, resourceful, and deeply caring. It was a pleasant surprise, and it made him realize that this partnership was becoming more than he had ever imagined. Evenings became a time for connection beyond work. They cooked meals together, sharing stories, laughing at small mistakes in the kitchen, and gradually learning each other's habits and preferences. John noticed how attentive Li Mei was, how she remembered the way he liked his coffee, or how he preferred the firewood stacked. Li Mei noticed John's quiet gestures, the way he would pause to ask about her day, the way he would quietly handle tasks she might struggle with, and the subtle ways he showed consideration for her comfort. These small, consistent acts built a deep sense of trust and care between them. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sunset, John realized how much he had come to rely on Li Mei's presence. The ranch, once so lonely and silent, now felt alive with shared experiences and companionship. He had expected a practical arrangement, a quiet partnership at best, but he found himself appreciating her in ways he had not anticipated. It was not a rush of dramatic emotion, but a quiet, steady affection that grew stronger with each shared day. Li Mei, too, felt the change within herself. She had come to the ranch with cautious expectations, unsure if she could adapt or find happiness in such a distant place. And yet, she found herself feeling valued, understood, and cared for. She enjoyed the work, the routine, and most importantly, the companionship that John offered. She began to think of the ranch not just as a place of work, but as a home, a place where she could belong, grow, and build a life with someone who respected and cared for her. Their bond also grew in unexpected ways through small, unplanned moments. A simple gesture, like bringing a warm blanket to Li Mei when she returned from the fields, or her insistence on sharing a cup of tea after a long day, became meaningful acts of care. They began to anticipate each other's needs, learning the rhythms of each other's days, and finding joy in the routine of living together. These small, everyday moments became the foundation of trust, affection, and partnership. They also found joy in exploring the world around the ranch. On weekends, they would take walks along the nearby creek, watch the wildlife, and talk about things beyond the daily tasks. Li Mei was fascinated by the birds, the deer, and the changing landscape through the seasons. John, in turn, appreciated her curiosity and fresh perspective. Seeing the ranch through her eyes, these shared experiences deepened their connection, creating memories and moments that would become part of the life they were building together. The emotional connection between them grew steadily. John began to notice how much he cared for Li Mei, how her happiness and comfort mattered to him more than he had expected. He found himself checking on her small gestures, appreciating her laughter, and feeling a sense of pride in her accomplishments. Li Mei, in turn, noticed John's thoughtfulness, his steady presence, and his quiet way of showing care. She felt secure, valued, and gradually, a warm affection for him began to take root in her heart. By the end of this period, the relationship between John and Li Mei had transformed significantly. What had started as a cautious, practical arrangement had evolved into a partnership built on mutual respect, trust, and understanding. There was a quiet affection that had grown from shared work, shared laughter, and shared challenges. Both of them had discovered qualities in each other that went beyond expectations: strength, patience, thoughtfulness, and resilience. The bond between them was subtle, not dramatic, but undeniable. It grew in small moments: a helping hand, a shared joke, a quiet conversation by the fire. These moments, repeated day after day, created a deep connection that neither had anticipated, but both had come to cherish. They had discovered that companionship could be profound, meaningful, and life-changing, even in the most ordinary aspects of daily life. By now, John could no longer imagine the ranch without Li Mei's presence. The work, the quiet moments, and even the challenges of ranch life were enriched by her companionship. Li Mei felt the same way. She had come expecting uncertainty and adaptation, but she found herself feeling at home, not just in the ranch, but in the life they were creating together. There was a sense of stability, trust, and quiet joy that neither had expected, but both had come to treasure. As spring turned to summer, John and Li Mei continued to grow closer, their relationship deepening through shared experiences, understanding, and small acts of care. The initial awkwardness and uncertainty had faded, replaced by mutual respect, trust, and a quiet but undeniable affection. They were no longer just a man and a woman sharing a living space. They were partners, companions, and increasingly, friends who valued each other's presence, insight, and care. In the quiet moments of the evening, sitting by the fireplace or walking through the fields, both of them reflected on how far they had come. They had started as strangers, brought together by necessity and practicality. And yet, through patience, understanding, and shared effort, they had discovered something far more meaningful, a partnership that held the promise of love, trust, and a shared future. Summer had settled fully over the ranch, painting the fields with golden light and filling the air with warmth. The days were long, and the work was steady. But for John and Lee May, the rhythm of life had taken on a new meaning. Their partnership, which had started as a practical arrangement, had grown into something far richer. Each morning, when the sun rose over the horizon, they moved through the chores together not just as companions, but as a team connected by shared effort, understanding, and the quiet affection that had developed over the months. John noticed how much Lee May had become part of the land itself. She knew the best paths through the pastures, the animals recognized her presence, and she could handle situations with the cows and horses that once would have tested her patience. More than that, she brought life and warmth to the house. The small kitchen, once quiet and functional, now smelled of the meals she had learned to cook from her mother and adapted with ingredients from the ranch. Her laughter, once rare and cautious, now filled the spaces between the walls, making the house feel like a true home. Lee May, too, felt a profound change in her life. She had come to the ranch with uncertainty and hope, unsure if she could adapt to this distant and unfamiliar place. Yet, she found herself thriving in the routine and comfort of ranch life. And more importantly, she felt a sense of belonging she had never known. John's presence was no longer just a support or guide. He was someone she cared for deeply, someone she trusted, and someone she wanted to share her life with in every sense. Their bond had grown steadily, not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through countless small acts of care and understanding. John noticed when Lee May was tired after a long day, and he would quietly take over certain chores to give her a break. Lee May, in turn, anticipated his needs, offering encouragement, preparing meals, and ensuring that he was comfortable. The house and ranch became a place where they looked out for each other, not because they had to, but because they genuinely wanted to. One evening, after the chores were done, they sat together on the porch watching the sun dip behind the distant hills. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the air carried the scent of fresh grass and wildflowers. For a long moment, they simply watched in silence. Then Lee May spoke softly, reflecting on how far they had come since she first arrived. She described the nervousness she had felt, the challenges she had faced, and the moments when she had wondered if she could truly belong in this new world. John listened, his eyes following hers, and realized that he too had changed. He had expected a practical, perhaps lonely marriage, but instead, he had found companionship, understanding, and a love he had never imagined possible. Their conversations became more personal, touching on hopes, dreams, and even fears. Lee May admitted that she sometimes missed her family and her home in China, but she also expressed how much she valued her life on the ranch and the bond she shared with John. John shared stories of his past, moments of regret and triumph, and the quiet realization that life had a way of surprising those who were willing to embrace it. In these moments, they found comfort not only in the words they exchanged but in the shared understanding that they were no longer facing life alone. As the weeks passed, John began to notice the subtle ways his feelings had deepened. He felt warmth when Lee May laughed, concern when she struggled, and joy in her small successes. He began to look forward to the quiet evenings spent together, the shared meals, and the walks through the fields. There was a steady, comforting rhythm to his days now, anchored by her presence. He realized that the love he had never expected to find had quietly taken root in his heart, nurtured by shared work, trust, and the simple acts of kindness that had become a daily part of their life. Lee May, too, recognized her feelings growing stronger. She had come to the ranch seeking stability and companionship, but she had found much more. She cared deeply for John, not just for the help he provided or the guidance he offered, but for the man he was: patient, kind, and quietly strong. She appreciated his thoughtfulness, his willingness to listen, and the respect he showed her in every action. Her affection was steady, growing in a way that felt natural and true, not forced or rushed. Their connection extended beyond the home and fields. On weekends, they explored the surrounding countryside, discovering small streams, hidden groves, and quiet spots where the beauty of nature was unspoiled. Li Mei delighted in the sights and sounds of the land, often stopping to watch birds or pick wildflowers. John enjoyed seeing her wonder and curiosity, finding joy in her perspective and feeling a deeper connection to her with each shared discovery. These adventures, simple and quiet, reinforced their bond, creating shared memories that neither would forget. There were also moments that tested their growing closeness. Sometimes disagreements arose, usually over misunderstandings or differences in expectations. Perhaps Li Mei approached a task differently than John would, or John's instructions seemed unclear or overly cautious. Yet, each time, they addressed the issue calmly and respectfully. They learned to listen, compromise, and value each other's point of view. These challenges, rather than driving them apart, strengthened their relationship. They realized that true partnership required patience, understanding, and a willingness to grow together. One particularly memorable day came when a newborn calf needed extra care. Li Mei and John worked side by side, carefully feeding and comforting the fragile animal. The experience was exhausting but deeply rewarding. And as they sat together afterward, watching the calf rest safely, they shared a quiet moment of pride and satisfaction. It was in these shared experiences, hard work, problem-solving, and care for living things that they realized the depth of their bond. Their connection was no longer just emotional. It was practical, real, and life-affirming. The small gestures of everyday life became expressions of love and commitment. John would leave warm water for Li Mei before breakfast, knowing she would appreciate it on cool mornings. Li Mei would prepare his favorite meal, anticipating his preferences without being asked. They began to finish each other's sentences, understand each other's unspoken needs, and find joy in the presence of one another. It was a quiet, steady kind of love, built on trust, respect, and shared experience, growing stronger with each passing day. As summer turned toward autumn, the changes in their relationship became undeniable. John realized that he no longer viewed Li Mei as a practical companion or helper. She was his partner, his friend, and the person he wanted to share his life with. He found himself thinking about her during the day, missing her when she was busy with chores, and feeling a sense of anticipation for the quiet evenings they spent together. Li Mei felt the same, her affection growing with every shared laugh, every kind gesture, and every challenge they faced together. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned golden, John finally allowed himself to speak his feelings aloud. He told Li Mei how much he valued her, how her presence had transformed the ranch and his life, and how he cared for her deeply. Li Mei, with a gentle smile, admitted that she felt the same way. They realized that what had started as a cautious, practical arrangement had blossomed into a deep, genuine love. Their affection was steady and true, built over months of shared work, understanding, and small, meaningful gestures. The realization of their love did not change the rhythm of ranch life, it enhanced it. They continued to work side by side, care for the animals, and maintain the home. But now, each action was infused with warmth, consideration, and a sense of partnership. Life was still challenging at times, but the challenges were easier to face together. They found joy in the ordinary, comfort in each other's presence, and satisfaction in the shared accomplishments that marked each day. Li Mei and John also began to think about the future together. They spoke of plans for the ranch, ways to improve life on the property, and dreams they wanted to pursue as a team. The idea of building a life together, not just for the present but for years to come, became real and tangible. They imagined long-term goals, supported each other's aspirations, and realized that they had found not only love, but a true partnership. By now, the ranch felt like a home, in the fullest sense of the word. The house, once quiet and filled only with memories of John's solitary life, now resonated with laughter, conversation, and the warmth of shared life. The animals responded to Li Mei's care and attention. The fields were well tended, and even the chores seemed less burdensome when shared. Life had become richer, fuller, and more meaningful not because it was easier, but because they faced it together. In the quiet moments, sitting together on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields, both John and Li Mei reflected on their journey. They had started as strangers from different worlds, brought together by circumstance and necessity. Yet, through patience, understanding, and countless small acts of care, they had discovered a love that was steady, real, and deeply fulfilling. They had built not only a partnership but a home, a shared life, and a bond that neither had anticipated, but both cherished. As autumn painted the ranch in shades of red and gold, their love continued to grow. John and Li Mei moved forward with confidence, knowing that they had found something rare and valuable, a connection that could withstand challenges, bring joy in the everyday, and transform their lives forever. They had discovered that love could appear quietly, in small gestures, shared experiences, and mutual understanding. And when it did, it could change everything in the most beautiful and unexpected ways.